who, quote, had an environmental solution, heard that interview, and then heard the next one, and the next one was about who's accountable and the distinction between the general contractor and the subcontractors, where we name some of them and talk about this complex matrix of no accountability. The guy was going to do an interview, and he called me back, and he goes, I'm sorry, but my people have said we cannot have anything to do with you because we want to sell something to BP. You know, I mean, literally, one night, really excited, wanting to come on the show, to we don't want anything to do with you. We want to distance ourselves from you. I said, are you kidding? Can you call upon your strength and stand up? You are being a guest. We don't all have to agree on everything.
But what they're concerned about is actually, well, A, their idea is not going to be taken on, but also B, being tied into some form of risk of litigation for being hooked into a call for accountability. This is again about not having sufficient provisions in there to protect whistleblowers and to understand that in fact whistleblowing is very important, and to be able to stand up to these the big corporations, big business, and say, look, you got to get to grip here, because if you don't, you're going to be slapped with imprisonable offences, which will make you take responsibility. And the world is moving that way. In a way, when you put out big ideas like Ecocide, there's no going back. The very first day I put it out on the internet, I did a Google search and I got 28 pages up on Ecocide. I just had a look this weekend to see how many pages we have now, and what's listed here is 111,000 pages. That's just within 3 months alone. So what we're seeing is this word. Now you can buy T-shirts all over the world and bumper stickers with BP, Ecocide, what have you. But nevertheless, people are actually starting to get to grips with the idea that there is massive destruction going to ecosystems here, and that this is wrong. And it's only one step from recognizing the morality of it as being wrong to then actually implementing it into law so that it really is stopped. Sadly, it ultimately always takes some form of disaster for us to have that put in place. But we are looking at that time now. We need to move very fast to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again, because this is killing the seas. And ultimately, it has a huge knock-on impact on
habitat,
on humans as well. Yeah, all habitats, absolutely.
Here's the thing that's really driving a lot of people here in the United States crazy about this. It's bad enough that it happened in the Gulf Coast. It's bad enough that it has happened, and it's bad enough that it's going on. But what people have had a major issue with here is, aside from suffering about that and upset and worry about that, there has been a highly controlled ban with the media. Basically, BP's in charge. I mean, I do not understand. And by the way, this could be any president that allows any company that knowingly was using faulty equipment to work with no accountability, 700 fines. Why are they given authority in the Gulf Coast to run the project? I don't get it. Explain it to me.
Well, I'm not terribly sure I can, except to go back on the fact that it's complete failure of recognition of responsibility. And if you can't levy responsibility against an individual, then ultimately it's a corporation. This is no good. A piece of paper can never be put into prison. This is why it's so important through international crime that it's individuals that will be imprisoned. If you think you're going to go to prison, there's an awful lot you will suddenly no longer agree to do if it's risky. Banks just won't finance and bankroll big projects that could mean that their head of whichever bank has loaned money could end up in prison for having bankrolled an investment that is going to create ecocide. Likewise, governments will no longer put in place supporting policies for something that could create ecocide. So this really is about actually imposing responsibility, and it's preventative. I mean, the beauty is you put in an international crime such as this, you'll find that an awful lot of this activity stops overnight. You give a transition period for corporations to realign themselves and, of course, finance it, give them huge subsidies to do so. But, of course, governments will be having to pool the subsidies that are propping up the damaging activity in the first place. So you're realigning your finance into that where it needs to go. And it really is innovation in a completely different direction then. Energy companies are just one example, but suddenly you'd be shifting from dirty energy to clean energy, for instance. And money would be freed up to do that. That's very important also. But without actually ascertaining or being able to impose upon someone direct responsibility for making decisions at top of organizations, we're pretty scuppered. And that's really where international crime comes into its own. It really does impose that responsibility once and for all.
What is the trust? The trust is an organization. Is that it, the Planet Earth Trust?
No, the Planet Earth Trust is really a way of trying to demonstrate to people how we can use trust laws to protect the planet. So I'm inviting anyone to come and join up on the site and become a trustee of the planet. Now, it really is actually a mindset, but in law we have trustees, and it's demonstrating how we can use laws to protect the planet, and in fact why we should be doing this. So for you to sign up and become a trustee, then you have duties and obligations. Any trustee of any organization has duties and obligations, and therefore responsibilities. And so it's basically saying, yes, I'm prepared to become a trustee of the planet Earth, and I'm prepared to uphold my duties and obligations to protect this planet. And I've set out various suggestions of what those duties and obligations are. But the important thing really here is for people to start shifting their approach to how they view the planet. If you view the planet as a thing, then you will ultimately put a price on it. You will impose a value on it. You will commoditize it. You will trade it. But if you view the planet as a living being, then you take responsibility. You see yourself in a stewardship role. You see the intrinsic value rather than imposing a price value and commoditizing it. And that's a very different approach. That's something that Indigenous people understand at a very deep level.
Exactly.
Buddhists as well. The interesting thing is that I found out to my amazement there are 380 million Indigenous people living on this planet who are living as Indigenous people. Not just sitting in a city and saying, okay, I'm Indigenous, but actually living off the land as their ancestors did. And Buddhists, there are 370 million Buddhists in the world. And of course, for them, it's a way of life not to abuse the planet and certainly do not view the planet as a thing, but as a living being and accord it respect and reverence. And what I realized was that, in fact, you take just those two groups of people together, that's over 750 million people. That's the size of Europe. The size of Europe already gets this, So how come when we've got so many people in this world living this way, and it's not just Buddhists or Indigenous people, there are people living in the cities as well and what have you that really get this at a very deep level and are essentially applying these principles into their own life. How come we're not doing this on a larger scale? And in fact, why don't we do it at a larger scale? Why is it that we are treating the planet as a piece of property when we can actually make it a trust? So trusts are legally binding instruments. And my idea is that, in fact, if we get even more people signed up to this concept, then arguably you can say that, in fact, by dint of numbers alone, this is the preeminent law to apply, rather than saying, okay, what was called terra nullius, no one lives in this patch, and those locals will ignore them. We'll just put our stake in here and put our flag up and say, okay, it's now ours, and we'll write up a contract and say this now is ours, we own it, and we'll rubber stamp it, and therefore we've imposed an ownership on it. This is a very human-made construct. To actually say we have ownership. Ownership per se is a very strange idea. which was born of, unfortunately, lawyers. But if we step back and actually look at